Welcome to the WellCast. The world has a lot to say. We're bringing a biblical perspective to those conversations.
Welcome back to another episode of the WellCast. We are back and we are in a new series.
Brand new, Jordan.
Mr. Mike, we are going to be talking through the major world religions, why they're important, what they are, what their definitions are and things, and how to reach people for Jesus.
Yeah, I'm super excited about this series.
What excites you about this?
I just think there's so many differing views out there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so important for us as Christians to know why we believe what we believe, which is a different topic.
Yeah.
And we devote most of this podcast to that topic. But also to understand what views are out there and how they differ, how they're the same, and how we engage those people with those beliefs.
Yeah, we're living in a pluralistic society now. To be American is not synonymous with Christian.
Yeah.
And I think we need to know how to meaningfully engage with people who don't think like us, right?
Well, and not only is, being American not synonymous with Christian, but the world is shrinking, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we live in a global world. There are people listening right now to us who travel internationally for work and things like that. And so it's much more important now, maybe more than ever, for us to at least be educated on what the major world views are.
Yeah, and I think most of the time people are like, well, why would I do that? Like, I barely know anything about what I believe.
Right.
Right. But I think, we do have the Great Commission, right? Where we need to reach people for Jesus. And by his desire, we need to know what they think in order to have meaningful dialogue, right?
Yeah, I think so. And I think this gives us an opportunity really to dive in and maybe just sharpen some tools that we have.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to talk during the series. We're going to talk about how we as Christians can engage the gospel in the life of a person who believes differently than we do. So we're going to talk in each, as we walk through each of the world religions that we're going to cover. We're going to talk through strategy. Like, what does it look like for us to engage in conversation about the gospel? Somebody who is a Mormon, or somebody who is a Muslim, or somebody who's an atheist. So we're going to talk about all of those things. And so hopefully we just refine some tools. Yeah.
And I don't think, I think we're pastors.
Yeah.
And we know the Bible more than any other sort of religion text. And so we're not necessarily experts. We're not claiming to be experts. But what we do, I think that doesn't make us unable to actually talk about these things, right?
Yeah.
And, we're not, I think it's not our desire. I think hope people hear right away. It's not our desire to like mock or pull apart or, misrepresent anything as far as we're concerned. Our just desires that we understand, create a level of understanding of what the belief systems are, and then create a pathway towards reaching people who believe those things.
Yeah, I think it's important for us to talk about this, but I think, you just mentioned it, we're not the beginning and the end of this. And so we would encourage you, as you're listening to this, that this would just be the start of your education.
There may be some groups that we talk about, some religious, different places where you feel like particularly like inclined to learn more about. I think that's awesome. We want to encourage that.
Yeah, I have a former student of mine. His name is Connor, and Connor.
Oh, yeah, I know Connor.
Yeah, Connor. Yeah, you know him.
No.
From Simi Valley. But he graduated high school, and the Lord put the LDS church on his heart, and not that to become one, but to reach them.
That'd be a twist.
Yeah, that would be unexpected trip.
Yeah, to reach them.
But to reach them, and so he's devoted his time to going to Utah, and that's like his mission field, and he's educated himself. So I think there are things that we can do to better prepare ourselves to engage in gospel conversations with people.
Yeah, and we're going to start the series off just kind of with like a more blanket term than some of the more specific religions, but we're just going to start with atheism.
Yeah, and I think it's important, Jordan, because some people would say that atheism is the absence of religion, but I think what we want to define it as is a religion, something that takes faith to believe in. And I think atheism is one of those things that for me, it takes more faith to be an atheist, and by atheism, A meaning no or not, and then theism meaning God, a belief in God. So no belief in God. And so the idea that for me, it takes more faith to believe that God doesn't exist than to believe that God does exist.
I'd imagine you're going to help us unpack that statement at some point.
We'll unpack it a little bit, yeah.
Okay.
But I think it's just one of those things where, it's growing in our culture. And it's important for us to talk about what does it look like, and, what are the places where there's a tension between faith and atheism?
Yeah, I think we have like different types of atheists, right? And I think there's like I don't know. I think it'd be important to talk about, right, the different types. But what's interesting to me is a lot of times people say that it's growing, like you just said. But I feel like a lot of times in the past, people had like a functional atheism.
Yeah.
Where, maybe nominally, my family's Catholic, or my family's Christian, or my family's this or that. But really, truly, they don't like hold to any belief system. They just kind of have a loose morality that comes from a history of religion.
Yeah.
And then now I would say more people are gravitating towards actually labeling themselves as something like an atheist or an agnostic.
Yeah, there really are three terms. What you just talked about is the practical atheist. So there's the there's the atheist that walks and talks like they have a belief in God. They may even claim to have a belief in God, but at the end of the day, they're not living as if they actually believe that God exists. The belief in God is a theory in their life, but it's not actually lived out. Craig Groeschel wrote a book. It's called the Christian Atheist, and he talks about how our churches are filled with people who are living out this practical atheism. They place a label on themselves of like, I believe in God, or I believe in Jesus, or I'm a Christian, but they don't actually live their life in that way. So that's the first kind of category of atheists. And it's important to walk through these because I think we just think atheist, right? But it's a broad term, like you mentioned.
Yeah, I remember one time driving to SLO, San Luis Obispo, and there was like a highway that was adopted. It was like, they had the adopt a highways things, and it's like this highway is adopted by the Atheist Society in San Luis Obispo. And I was like, oh, okay. Like, that sounds kind of like a church.
Yeah. Atheists gather just to tell people that there isn't a God. Yeah, and that's the way that atheism works.
So this practical idea of atheism, what would you say, like, how does that play out? What does that look like for sort of your neighbor, your friend, even yourself, if this is convicting?
Yeah, so I mean, they go throughout their life, and in a lot of ways, I was this person until Christ grabbed a hold of my heart. Like I always kind of believed in God, but he had no practical part of my life.
Yeah, to say that Jesus is Lord implies something for how you actually live your life, right?
Yeah.
So this person, you would say that they're the Lord of their own lives.
Well, and they may believe in God as some vague theory, like in their life, but there's no they're not consumed by the things of God. They don't live their life as if. So like any other religion that we're going to talk through on this series, there is a response to the belief that a God exists. And that's where you get the religion. The response that we see from atheists there's a response to the belief that God does not exist. It still has implications on their life. And so for this practical atheist, it's just people that are just living as if God doesn't exist. They don't have strong feelings either way. You're not going to see them debating any of the major apologists that are out there. They're not going to be debating that stuff, but they just live as though God doesn't exist, and they're pretty indifferent about it.
And so the next one we talked about is called weak atheism.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so weak atheism is the belief that God is not really provable or unprovable. And so because we can't really prove that, and because the issue doesn't really affect their life, they're just going to go on living their lives as if God does not exist. They do not believe that God does not exist. They just believe that God is not provable, and so since it's not provable, they have no reason to consider him in their lives. So they're they're as opposed to the third, which is strong atheists. They're not the ones that are in your face about it. They take a stronger stance than the practical atheist, because the practical atheist might even actually say they believe in God.
Yeah.
Whereas the weak atheist is more like, it's like it holds to the concept that God just is an unresolvable issue.
Like it's something I'd rather not think about.
Yeah.
Like, and this maybe even be labeled as like the sort of unobtrusive.
Yeah.
Right. So like they would just be like, like,
it's not worth their time.
Yeah, or it's not even worth arguing about.
Yeah.
You do your thing, I'll do my thing.
Yeah.
This is what I think, but it's really, it's unknowable.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then I think the third form of atheism, I would say, is the one we usually think about the most, probably.
Yeah,
right?
Strong atheism.
Yeah, it's the strong atheist. It's the position is like we're active opponents of the existence of God.
Mm-hmm.
So we are going to evangelize the message that God does not exist. We're going to debate those who want to debate us. We're going to write books about it, and we are going to believe that philosophy and science that's driven by reason will leads to the conclusion that God does not exist. And because God cannot exist, and they believe that it's mostly provable, although nothing is to them is essentially provable completely, that drives their system of ethics, it drives their belief system, and everything that's tied to that.
So like around when I was in college, I graduated in 2011. And around that time, you had like the 4 horsemen of the atheist apocalypse, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was so popular.
Yeah.
Read like Dawkins's God Delusion.
Mm-hmm.
You had, oh my gosh, I can't remember any of the other people. Daniel Dennett, and these guys who Christopher Hitchens, the British journalist, and you had these guys who. They wrote all these books. They were very adamantly opposed. They had a desire to make it almost popular, to be it was almost like an anti-theist, right? So you have like, I would say even in strong atheism, you have like a spectrum, right? Where you have people who they have definite reasons and care about this, saying like, I think that the world would be a better place if people did away with religion.
Yeah.
And then you have the very, very adamant people who would say like, actually religion is a bad thing.
Right.
And that we actively want to sort of work against it, destroy it. And any belief in God is holding humanity back from progress as a whole.
Right.
And so like, I would say that there's even nuance in there, but it is, I think I would call it at times a thoughtful atheism too, right?
Sure. Yeah. It's not without reason. I mean, they make arguments, they use, and obviously, I mean, there's not like 2 atheists in the world.
No. Yeah.
So, even like right now, the fourth member of your Horsemen of Atheism is Sam Harris. And he's a big voice for that. And I think, one of the things that you can see is they're worthy debaters. Like they've thought through their stuff. It's not a whim. It's not, I don't want to believe in God. A lot of these people have a previous belief in God that has gone away, that they've walked away from, and found themselves in atheism. And so I would never categorize this as like some unthoughtful, place that they've arrived to.
Yeah, they've like stumbled into it, or that they're dumb in some way, or No,
many of these atheists are very intelligent, and so it's not a question of intelligence. It's just a question of really probability, right? I think when we talk about atheism versus theism, it's a question of probability. Which one's more plausible? Which one's more probable?
Yeah, and I think like there would be sort of some of my atheist friends who maybe would throw up in their mouths to hear that we're like, oh, it is a faith, or it is a religion or something. Because I mean, I've heard a lot of people say that it's just the absence of, right? Yeah. I don't know. Is there room to unpack that here, or do we want to get that eventually?
No, I think we can. I mean, I think the idea of religion is a faith in something, right? Something that's essentially uncompletely, like something that takes faith is something that's 100% is unprovable to in its completion. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So like you can't prove fully that God exists. Like there takes some faith.
Yeah.
Now there is evidence, there are things. So if you take that same kind of definition or thought process, then realistically, the only place you can arrive at is that atheism is a religion. Because it takes faith to believe that there is no God. You can't prove that.
Yeah, you can't prove a negative.
Yeah, you can't prove a negative. So and that's why I actually really believe, and that's the number one reason. There are others that I'm sure we'll get into. I think that's why I really believe it takes way more faith to believe in the absence of God than in the existence of God.
I think it was C.S. Lewis that talked about how everyone has a worldview, and every sort of thought about existence is a worldview. Yeah. It shapes the way you view the world, right? And that the belief that there is, because it is a belief that there is no God, will define your view of the world. And so I think I'd love to talk about like maybe some of the sort of surface level problems that we see with atheism as those who are theists, and specifically Christians believing in the God that is defined in Scripture in the Bible. But what would you say let's start with something like creation.
Yeah, so I mean, before we even get there, the elephant in the room is there's no debate going on here. That's not our intention. That's not our hope. But it is two theists, Christian theists, that are sitting here discussing atheism. So I want to be generous to that truth.
Maybe we'd say, rather than debate, like, hey, there are some things that we're not going to like pull apart the whole atheist worldview, right? We're not experts, like I said. We're not professors of world religion. But what we do want to do is say, hey, if you would call yourself an atheist, you have to wrestle with these things. Yeah. Just like there are oppositions to Christian faith that we have to wrestle with. We can't be in ignorance to.
Yeah. And I think even the things we're going to talk through are so much deeper than our lack of expertise is going to get to. But I think,
we can't cover it all in 30 minutes.
But you mentioned creation, right? And there are a lot of different theories of creation. We believe in the biblical creation narrative, right? So
an eternal God.
That it began over a 6-day period. But regardless of that, like we're actually talking about the existence of a God. Like that's the difference between a theist and an atheist, right? So creation, we see, the universe has begun with such extreme precision. There's an argument called the fine-tuning argument. And essentially like the argument, Stephen Hawking, who is not a well-known he's a well-known scientist.
I was like, what?
He's not a well-known like believer of God. Like he's not an apologist.
No, yeah.
But he said if the rate of expansion 1 second after the Big Bang had been smaller by even 1 part in 100,000 million, it would have recollapsed before it reached its present size. And so in order for us to be here, in order for the universe to take shape the way that it did, there was such extreme precision that it actually is evidence towards intelligent design. Another idea is if the gravitational force changed even slightly, we're talking 1 times 10 to the 40th power. So that's a 1 with 40 zeros after it. If the gravitational force had changed even that much, the sun wouldn't be where it is and the moon would crash into the earth.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And so you just look at those things, and for me, it doesn't by any means prove God, right? But it is extreme evidence for the idea of intelligent design. That this just didn't happen.
Well, I think
chance.
even like faith, right? Where you have the sort of atheistic worldview would say that creation came from nothing. Still.
Yeah.
You have to still deal with the fact that we have an explanation, at least in our faith, for what came before. What is that nothing? It is a person. It is God.
Yeah.
And he is eternal. We don't pretend to explain that or even understand something like eternality.
Right.
But he gives us an answer. In he is pre-existent.
Yeah.
He created time and everything within it, and that he spoke everything into existence.
Yeah.
Really, the atheist worldview has to answer that question, or at least wrestle with the fact that it takes faith to say, I don't know what there was a beginning.
Yeah.
And I don't know what that beginning was or what came before it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're right. And I think not only that,
it's not a slam dunk. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. You have to wrestle with it. And the idea that even if it was a big bang, which is not my theological view, but even if there was a big bang and something came from nothing, it's only done it once. It's never been recorded another time. It doesn't just spontaneously happen in this world. Like, we've never experienced it. And so we're trying to prove.
Well, and to present people like maybe a spectrum, I would probably be on the side of things, maybe shocker for some people, but that says like, well, God said it and bang, it happened, right?
Yeah.
So I'm also not a scientist.
Yeah.
And I don't know what to think about all these things, but I do believe that God is at the center of all creation.
Right.
And so like to present people that spectrum, I think is important for us as a heart, you would say as well. But I think we still have an answer, right?
Yeah.
And I think atheists have to deal and wrestle with that idea of that takes faith on their behalf, right?
Yeah, I think so. And I think, all of this stuff that we're talking about
or belief. I don't know what you're saying.
Things that we're just talking about evidence, right? We're trying to create an evidentiary argument for the existence of God. Because we're talking about theological problems that we recognize in atheism. I think another one, that we can talk about is intelligent design, right? So if you look at not just
aliens, right?
Yeah, no, not aliens. I don't want to confuse people. That would be, we could go down that, but it's the idea. So, man, I heard this when I was younger, and it's just really stuck with me. If you take a bunch of watch parts and you put them in a box and you shake that box up, you could shake it forever and it will never be a watch. It will just be watch parts that are broken even more than they already were.
Worn down after a while. At least.
And so like the idea that like there wasn't intelligent, like if you have a watch in a box, it screams of the watchmaker, right?
Which you mean is like, complexity.
Yeah. There's
where
complexity.
If one part was removed,
it wouldn't be a watch.
Yeah.
It wouldn't work. And so you see that like screams of intelligent design. If you were walking down the beach, right? I mean, the beach of Fresno, Millerton Lake.
Millerton Lake,
yeah. So if you're walking down the beach at
those muddy shores,
the muddy shores of Millerton Lake, and you
sounds like a sweet novel.
Yeah, and you see in the sand is in the rocky sand,
the mud,
in the mud is written like Mike loves Kristen. You wouldn't assume it just.
And be like, what?
Yeah, you wouldn't assume it just like showed up there. You would assume that Mike probably wrote Mike loves Kristen, or Kristen wrote it hoping that Mike loves Kristen.
Mike's got it bad, guys.
But you wouldn't just assume that it just appeared, because there's intelligent design. There's spelling, there's letters, it wasn't just a mark that was made by the water or by some bird. It was actually an intelligent being that wrote that.
Yeah.
And so I think those arguments are really, really important for us to consider when we talk about
you have to deal with things like irreducible complexity, right?
Yeah.
Where there are things that seem that if they were to not have developed to a certain point or have been started at a certain point, if you took them apart or moved them backwards, they would not function the way they do. Similar to your, watching a box sort of idea. I think just like you have to understand that it's not as simple as like, hey, evolutionists, atheists, or scientific materialists, they just have the answer and we're going to have to deal with it. Well, actually, all these places have extreme gaps. And I think you have to deal with the fact that there are things that are unanswerable in those areas.
Yeah, and here's another one. And And I think, I'd love to hear what you think about it, but the idea of objective ethics or objective morality,
Yeah.
like for me, it screams of the existence of God. What do you think?
So this is a conversation I've had a lot with my friends who would call themselves atheists. And I think for me, this is probably one of the most potent, especially for young people. Because I think we've talked about this on here before. A lot of young people are like, very justice prone, justice oriented. And so I have these friends who are like, they're a hardcore atheist, but they're also like hardcore pro-choice or hardcore, what would be another issue? I'm kind of blanking. Like, or just, I don't know, let's take any issue, right? You could say I'm anti-rape.
Yeah.
And that's like pretty universal.
Most people.
Hopefully I'm anti-murder.
Yeah. Other than murderers, most people are
like,
on board with that.
I just don't want to do the whole pro-choice thing because I don't want to paint all atheists into one area.
And that's not what this episode is.
Yeah. And so you can say that, right? And you have to answer the question of, okay, well, where does that thought come from? Where does the thought in your mind come from that is wrong? Who determines that, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of my friends have very thoughtful answers, right? Things like, well, society as a whole has to determine that. But then you can't necessarily answer that and say that another society, like, I mean, we always use the Nazis as punching bags.
Yeah.
But I mean, they were very much so on board as a whole with the systematic killing of all the Jews, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you look at the Ottoman Empire and the Armenians, like that, they were pretty hardcore on board with the idea that Armenians should not exist.
Yeah. Well, and it becomes a democracy of what is right and wrong, right? What is morally acceptable. And
you have no ability to actually speak to the morality of other people if it's defined within you or a society, right?
Yeah, because if there is no God, then there is no standard of ethics. It doesn't mean there's no ethics, right? Because we can define ethics. If there's no God, you can still say, well, that's wrong to me.
You can reason your way into a lot of things, right?
Yeah. So,
but what we're talking about is universality, right?
Yeah. So the Humanist Manifesto, the second one that was written in 1973, it says this. It says, we affirm, and by humanism, we mean essentially like atheists. So we affirm that moral values derive their source from human experience. Ethics is autonomous and situational, needing no theological or ideological sanction. Ethics stems from human need and interest. And so this is a definition that is brought with hard, things to accept. Right? That means that if you and I have different interests, then we could have opposing, like I could want to kill you because you are a drain on society. And because the greater good is achieved by me killing you, then murder becomes acceptable.
What you are literally describing is the eugenics movement.
Yeah.
Right? It is ethicists and scientists who put their heads together saying that the world would be a better place. This didn't just take place in Nazi Germany. This took place all across the Western world. And I have 2 disabled siblings.
And not just the Western world, Africa and Cambodia, they've had genocides. I mean,
yes. Oh, well, sorry. Eugenics and genocides are different things, right? And so I think as far as eugenics goes, I think, and if you don't know what that is, it's basically a movement of ethicists and scientists who said that we can actually fine-tune the human race by getting rid of unwanted genomic strains. And so like if somebody has certain disability A or B or C, we can actually kill them or neuter them in some way from reproducing, and that's ethically okay.
Right.
Now, the Christian worldview says that those people, although not, neurotypical, actually have image qualities of God, that they are the image of God, that they are valuable inherently, no matter their ability to contribute to society or whatnot.
Yeah.
Now, I would legitimately say that the atheist who has a problem with that does so on no necessarily like authority ground, any solid ground, right? And so like we're not necessarily saying that like atheists are people of like no value. I think we're saying the opposite. That everybody has hardcore values.
Mm-hmm.
Things like murder's bad, rape's bad,
Right.
killing kids is bad, genocide is bad.
Mm-hmm.
But what we would say is, as an atheist, you're going to have a really hard time explaining why those things are actually bad.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, there are cultures, right? There are cultures where female mutilation is seen as a good thing.
Mhm.
But I would really have a hard time finding any atheists who believe that is actually a good thing.
Mhm.
And so what we're saying is that you at no point are you, if you're an atheist, at no point can you say something is wrong.
Yeah.
You can only say, I think that's wrong.
Mhm.
And it becomes what you think versus
Mhm.
an objective moral measuring stick.
Mhm.
And there's a French ex-atheist. His name is I'm going to butcher it. It's Guillaume Bignon. That's how I'm going to do
Sure.
the best of it. But he said this. So he was an ex-atheist. So he was an atheist, and then he realized that there was something that and this particular topic really hit him hard as he thought through atheism. He said, in reality, to be a consistent atheist, one must affirm that the Islamic terrorists in Paris, this was back when they went on a killing spree there, didn't do anything wrong.
Wrong in quotes, right?
Yeah, in quotes, as such. They only acted out of line with our personal preferences and in line with theirs. If there's no ultimate arbiter of right and wrong, that's all we're left with.
Mhm.
And I think that just sums it up really well. Is like, there is no, it's just their preference versus ours. There's no objective morality if you're an atheist.
Yeah, universal or ultimate or objective truth just simply doesn't exist outside of what they would think is some sort of scientific process.
Yeah, and this actually combines with the next reason why, right? So
Mhm.
so it's not just it's not just the idea of objective morality, but the existence of evil. A lot of people will say the existence of evil is a reason to not believe in God.
Mhm.
Like, if there's a good God, how could so and so happen? But
Yeah.
But if you look at things objectively, the existence of evil,
Yeah, so define evil, right?
yeah, it's actually the evidence. It's a good evidence for the existence of a good God,
Mhm.
right? Because
You know something's wrong.
yeah, there's no ability to determine evil without an objective standard.
You have to have sort of the opposite side, right? You have to have an understanding of, well, what is evil held up to?
Yeah,
Right?
Without God, it's just
Mhm.
one person's opinion over another. There is no evil.
Mhm. What creates a standard for right and wrong? What is evil? How do you they kind of bleed into each other, right?
Well, even C.S. Lewis said evil requires good and good requires evil. I mean, good requires God. So evil requires good and good requires God.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting because there are a lot of atheists that are focused on justice.
Mm-hmm.
And it blows my mind sometimes.
Well, my heart would be that, and that's what I always tell my friends, is like, look, let that idea in your heart maybe help you consider that there's something that gifted you that sense of morality, what we would call common grace, right?
Sure.
That's something outside of you. Maybe you do bear that thing's image, and that image is good.
Yeah.
And that thing has placed that desire in your heart to see justice, right? And, I think that has been a very effective way to get some of my friends to just consider what is going on inside of me.
Yeah.
And do I actually have any right to do this thing or say that something's right or wrong?
Yeah.
And that's a tough thing to actually examine, right?
Yeah. I think it's really tough. And we're just starting the dialogue.
Yeah.
If there are people out there that would consider themselves atheists and they're listening to our podcast, somehow you accidentally ended up on our podcast, we're glad you're here. And our hope would just be that you would just ask those questions. We're not trying to tell you what to believe. We're just trying to point some things out that we see as evidences for the existence of God.
Yeah. Well, do you think there's anything else that needs to be pointed out?
I just think I think we need to think about how we engage people with the gospel. People who are atheists who have no belief in God. I think we need to think about how we do that. And so, I always tell people, step one, Jordan, what is it?
Pray.
Yes. Step one is to pray.
He softballed that
as I
to
got
me.
a T. We did not rehearse that ahead of time. It's to pray, right? I mean, prayer. Only God can change hearts, and I think we have to remember that as we enter into these conversations. The second for an atheist is so important. Romans 1:18 through 20.
Mm-hmm.
It talks about how everyone at the very depth of who they are knows that God exists.
Mm-hmm.
And so are there people that believe that they don't believe that God exists? Yeah. But what God's word says is that everybody, that God has made his existence evident to all of them. And so deep down, we have to assume that deep down they really do believe that God exists.
Yeah, if not like, the acknowledgement functionally, what we just talked about was functionally you exist and, live out your life in a society in a way with which there is some sort of outside force creating a standard for justice.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, knowing that, I think that puts a lot of the emphasis on them, but also asking a ton of questions.
Mm-hmm.
Man, I don't know about you. Have you ever experienced the freedom of just asking questions about what somebody else believes? Like it's amazing.
Yeah, that's basically 100%. I wouldn't say I have a particularly a great gift of evangelism.
Yeah.
I think sort of the other side of this is, there are some people who are very evangelistically inclined. They are very apologetics minded.
Yeah.
And they want to understand these things deeply. I've still yet to see somebody be, turn to Christ by anger and argument.
Right. What about on Facebook?
Yeah, actually thousands.
Okay.
Yeah, similar to this.
Good.
Yeah, I think I just haven't.
Yeah.
And so our encouragement, anytime I've ever led anybody to Jesus and seen their hearts turn towards him, it's because this is a conversation.
Yeah.
And it's because there's a desire to understand and be understood. And in that reciprocity, you're actually going to see a sense of goodwill that's going to open the heart to Jesus.
Yeah, I agree. And I think as you do start to ask questions of what they believe, it has to be genuine, first of all.
Yeah.
You also have
People
to
can tell if you're waiting to just listen or waiting to talk.
Yeah. You have to, and that brings me to the next point. You have to listen well, and you have to understand why they've arrived at their conclusion. Most people, it's not a whim, like we talked about.
Consider that the same reasons that your environments or things that have led to how you believe is also the same for them.
Yeah. And then beyond that, connect relationally, love them. Like it's not, we don't exist just to share the gospel with people. We exist to love people. That's love God and love others. That's our goal.
Yeah, and to the Christian out there, if you don't know one atheist person, I would say consider the fact that they are actually in your life, but that you're either not approachable or you haven't seen them as possible friends or maybe enemies.
Yeah, and then finally, kind of maybe to the core of this episode is there are two ways, I think, to share Jesus. The first is to focus on the evidence, the things that we've talked about. Maybe get yourself even learned up even a little bit more on the issues of creation and morality and those types of things, and be willing to have a loving discussion. The evidence also that Christ existed, died on the cross, and came back from the dead. It's overwhelming.
Yeah.
Like the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus is really hard to refute. And so that's a good place to focus. And then share your personal testimony. I think nobody can refute what Jesus has done in your life.
Yeah.
Radical life transformation is an incredible evidence for the existence of Jesus.
Yeah. In Revelation 12:11, it says that I'm not saying that these people are Satan, but that Satan or the inclination towards things that are not Jesus and God. It says that Satan's defeated by the blood of the Lamb, which is the gospel, right? What you just described, the cross, and the word of their testimony.
Yeah.
And so your story matters.
Yeah.
And I think although your story alone does not prove God, it does show people who you love that God is real in your life, and it can be possible for them too.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a great way to go about.
Well, hopefully this just starts a conversation, right?
Yeah.
And that you guys see the people around you as those who are, thoughtful people, but that there are questions to be considered. And so we just pray that you guys would continue to develop those relationships in a way that move people towards Christ and not away from him divisively, and do so with just love and gentleness. So, if you guys are interested in this stuff, is there any recommended resources that maybe people can start diving into from your perspective, Mike?
Yeah, I think, Stand to Reason has a really good website. Crossexamined.org is really good. That's Frank Turek's website.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of really good apologetics books out there that talk about, this type of thing. And
yeah, I would recommend The Reason for God by Timothy Keller.
Yeah.
I'm not super into apologetics,
good.
but he writes a really great book on just how to engage in this stuff.
Yeah, The Case for God is another one. That's out there. And then with YouTube, you can pull up a lot of debates that are going on between atheists and Christian apologists.
It's very robust stuff.
Yeah.
I'd recommend on YouTube the Veritas forums.
Oh.
They're in academic settings. It's kind of a cool organization that gets different worldviews together.
That's great.
If you like what you heard, please share, please subscribe, like all the things above that people
Tell
do.
Tell people about us.
Tell people, and then even if you just want to send this to one of your friends who's an atheist and say, "Hey, I'd love to have a conversation around this. Let us be the whipping bag," or is that a thing? Whipping bag?
No, I don't know what. Punching bag.
Punching bag.
Yeah.
There we go. the punching boys.
Yes.
Instead of boost boys, we're now punching boys. So we'll see you guys next time on the WellCast. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the WellCast. As always, don't forget to subscribe and tell your friends about us. For more information about the Well Community Church, visit thewellcommunity.org.